Hello. Is this on? Yes? Yes. You can hear me? Yes. Good. I don't know. I don't know how to do in person. I've been Zooming for the last 2 years. It's all so strange. It's like a whole new experience. But it's so good to see people in person in spite of everything. Look, I have an actual mouth. So the speaker gets to take off his mask. All of you, unfortunately, do have to suffer through. Hopefully, we're all accustomed at this point. Although even the masks grow more and more confusing. How many masks? Which mask? What type of mask? Whether or not. Anyway, you know the whole drill. But I think we all feel good here at the museum. Our policy is that we all have to show proof of vaccination, including the booster. So we're doing everything we can to provide a safe environment. And I know that we all miss in-person interaction. So it's a real delight to be able to welcome Erik Risser back with us again. I hope that some of you have had the pleasure of listening to him speak before. He's an inspired speaker, but also just a fascinating person. All the research that he's done, the conservation work he's done all over the world, he's one in a million. And of course, we have benefited terribly from his gifts. I don't know that we ever will compensate him enough for all the time and energy he's given, most of it pro bono, I might add, to the museum with the antiquities collection. Most recently, he helped install the Lansdowne Hermes. And of course, you've seen how beautiful and intact, shall we say, he has become, if you're familiar with his bits. And that is all due to the talents of Erik Risser, who did a remarkable job of restoring him to all of his original beauty. Of course, original is hard to say since he's actually an amalgam of two, as the researchers at the Getty have also discovered, but that's a whole other story. But Erik does specialize, and it's an interesting thing to be able to say that you specialize in monumental sculpture, whether marble or in this case bronze, and he's restored some really remarkable things. He's been very involved in excavation all over the world. He's worked collaboratively with a lot of other museums, LA County Museum, but Nelson Atkins, also with museums in Italy, in Germany, the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna. So you get the picture. He's an internationally well-traveled conservator, and we're so fortunate that he took the time and the trouble to come here to Santa Barbara to give this talk in person, as he will describe his adventures in conserving a monumental bronze, this Drunken Seder. And as we all celebrated the new year, we probably can all relate to a Drunken Seder. So with that, please help me welcome him to the stage.
You guys hear me okay? Yeah, in the back? Okay, those of you who are here who know me know that I usually don't lack for words, so I will just talk a lot. Hopefully it will be interesting. If it's not, I hope to provide some pretty slides, some pretty images that you can just focus on as you nod off to what I'm saying. Thank you, Ike, for the introduction. I hope I can live up to it. I am very much socially as well as atrophied in general from COVID, so this is a nice sort of full circle moment. I gave a similar talk in Naples in December 2019 when I returned this piece to Italy and reinstalled it. So this is the first talk I'm giving now in 2022 about the same subject. So it's been nice to sort of dust this off and be able to rethink some of the things after having gotten some distance, because I am hoping in the next half a year to put pen to paper and produce an article on the findings that we found that then led to the decisions we made in the treatment of this piece. And hopefully in this talk you'll understand why that's significant. Has nothing to do with me, has everything to do with this object. And then this object type or material type in general. Okay, so what we see here, oops, wrong thing, laser pointer. This is the Getty Villa in Malibu, which is a 1970s, up to date at the time, scholarship recreation of this here, which is the Villa this is a digital reconstruction of the Villa dei Papiri in Herculaneum, or actually a little north of Herculaneum. This was a private residence of Lucius, believed to be of Lucius Calpurnius Piso, who was the father-in-law of Julius Caesar. So one of the things that, as I step into this, one of the amazing things is that we can associate names, we can associate dates, not only with the place, but with the find, and significantly with the people who pulled these out or did the restorations up to this point. That's something archaeologically that is very, very rare. In today's day and age, hyperbole is very commonplace. This is one of those few instances where it truly merits hyperbole in every sense. And I hope to be able to, if anything, be able to illustrate that a little bit, whether it's the site, whether it's the object, whether it's the history associated with the object, and then wrap that all into how those influenced the decisions I made related to this object, and then ultimately you'll see the outcome at the end. Okay, so I'm going to pitch this very general in the beginning, and then hopefully step progressively into more specifics. I'm not really sure. I know that people here are very learned, and they also come with a lot of knowledge, but I wanted to sort of start as to like why this piece is significant, besides the fact that it's associated with Herculaneum. The reason why this is important is, and again, to publish it, because this figure here is in bronze. Bronze in and of itself is very significant, related to antiquity, and in particular, you can see there's a ton of little bronzes back here, these small statuettes, but this scale here, virtually non-existent. Why that's important is bronze really was the medium of expression, preferred medium of expression in antiquity, artistically, okay? And what I mean by that is, we all know ancient statuary, in particular, from marbles. When's the last time you saw a marble that looked like this? So dynamic, right? If they have any type of dynamism, it usually is very much restrained by the size of the block they have to pull it from, but more importantly by the characteristics of the marble itself, what it does well and what it doesn't do well. And what marble doesn't do well is this, okay? Marble works in compression. It does not work in tensile or in shear very well. You can stack it up and it can take it. You cantilever it, it can't take it. This is a heck of a cantilever. In a marble, you would see potentially the same piece, but you'd probably have a nice weird strut sticking right there, which is a gravitational return from the small into the greater mass. Or the same here. Oh, this rock might come up and just touch his heel. Or if it's a standing statue, he's always conveniently, or she, going to be walking in a wooded area and a tree's jumping out to attack their leg. Or there is a canine companion walking next to them. While that's cute and nice, or if it's marine, you'll have a nice big dolphin coming up the back. But the idea really, those are artistic conventions put there to get around the limitations of the material. This material does not have those limitations, okay? This material allows you to express things to the fullest. As an artist, if you want a dynamic pose, dynamic posture, this is the one that will let you do it. Two-dimensional, sure, you can be really great at rendering something in 3D painted. This is the one three-dimensional media that will allow you to do it. It has fantastic tensile strength. Significantly as well is that this type of medium is the medium of reproduction. You want to create several marbles off of a model. That's hugely labor intensive, hugely wasteful in terms of the actual marble itself being a reductive process. We know the ancient sculptor Lysippus has hundreds of sculptures associated with it. Now, that's impossible for somebody to actually do hundreds of sculptures in their lifetime, particularly to the degree of those pieces that are associated with him. What that signifies is that he created several sculptures that were then reproduced over and over and over again. That's not in marble. That would have been in bronze. The idea of the bronze is that it comes from the lost wax technique, and specifically the indirect lost wax technique. Now, we use a lot of terminology, or we'll use a lot of words said in another language to make ourselves sound very highfalutin. But the reality is, I'll try to break it down for you. This here, we all have this conception of when something's made in bronze, it's done as a single piece. It's cast. We all think of the struggles that Leonardo had to realize his dream of the large horse, and he spent years and years and a lot of time and effort to try to figure out how to do a massive casting. A lot of that is left over from the medieval period, in which the only type of foundry, which is where casting is done, foundry work that was really done in the Middle Ages, was on bells. Bells, it is significant that they're made in a singular piece, so that they have resonance. Something like this, you can do it in a single piece. It's very difficult to achieve. So Donatello's David, a very famous sculpture, seen as sort of the first real life-size bronze created in the Renaissance. Therefore, from antiquity now to the Renaissance, the first time, another moon landing. That one's significant because it's done as a single pour. Very, very difficult to do, but a massive achievement. The ancients would have done that in pieces. So they would have said, why are you making your life difficult by trying to achieve that in a singular pour? There's a lot of reasons why that's hard. When something's molten, as it cools, of course it slows and it freezes. So to get something to flow from here down to here, very difficult. You're going to get stops, you're going to get gaps, you're going to get a lot of faults that you're then have to repair. But significantly, the amount of bronze that it takes to do a single casting here, that's very difficult and very hazardous to manipulate in the foundry. Modern foundries, everything's mechanized. Imagine taking all of that molten, trying to carefully take it and do a controlled pour. Why? Why try to lift 150, 200 pounds when you can lift 20 or 30 and do a much more controlled? And creating this, I have a lot greater guarantee of success than creating this, as long as I can actually then bring it together. So one of the things that they do in antiquity, and I'm just sort of laying this all out and then I'll show you the evidence of that, is that these are created in pieces and then they are literally metallurgically put together. They're welded together. They didn't have welders, MIG or TIG, in antiquity. So think about that. What they were able to achieve pyrotechnologically to melt the bronze, to pour the bronze, and then to weld the bronze together. Genius. But at the same time, because they used the indirect lost wax technique, they could do this over and over and over again. So the lost wax technique, a lot of us know it from jewelry, something like that. You create your initial object in wax. You encase that in a refractive material that can take heat, that will harden once it's been heated, and it burns the wax out. So you leave the hollow, the impression of the original object. And then you fill that with a molten metal that then cools and solidifies, and you crack the refractive material off, and voila, you have translated directly from wax to metal. That is the concept of lost wax. That is what we call direct lost wax, which has its applications, in things like jewelry. It does not have an application in something like this. We like to think that that's how they did things because it's so fraught with risk that they're geniuses, that they cranked this out and they managed to achieve that. No. They were all about hedging risk. They were all about economizing in antiquity. They didn't do things simply because it was tough. They did things and they tried to control the results. So something like this, they would have naturally figured out a way in which if they screw up, they can do it again. You don't have to start from scratch. So for the indirect, imagine this figure in your mind's eye in clay or in wax, in any material that you can model, okay? Modeling is very easy to manipulate. It's not stone where I have to do a massive reduction and I have to progressively refine it. I can build something up in clay and I can take it away. I can smooth it, I can rough it, I can carve it, I can do any of that. And I can do the same thing in wax if it's pliable, if it's plastic, right? That's the material you want to use to create something like this and refine. I do my initial that way. Now I just got to take a mold of it. The introduction of the mold makes it indirect. And what that means is, now if I take a mold of this, and of course we're not talking about silicone rubbers and these things that are flexible, hard molds, they didn't have those flexible materials. So you're making a mold in, say, like plaster. Now to make something like this, it would take hundreds of pieces that have to interlock. It's a very complicated skill to learn, but it can be done. And once you've done it, now I actually have this piece, the original, I have the negative of it that I can use over and over and over again, which is what we use molds for, right? But now I can take those molds for this and those molds for this and for this. And now I can fill them with molten wax, swish it around, pour it out so that I leave a very thin wall. And if it needs to be a little thicker, pour in some more wax, swish it around, dump it out. That's one way. That's typically what we think of when we think of indirect. You also can do what they call a sciacqua, which is basically, it's a wax that's had like a punic wax, where you've had wax with an organic material, like an oil, applied to it so it becomes much more liquid. You pour that in, or you brush it on and build it up that way, and then it sets up and solidifies. That's another technique for adding a thickness into a mold. The third is that you can cast out sheets, and then I can press those into a mold, bring it together, and just smooth my seam. I can do that with a gentle application of heat. Wax is brilliant to work with. It's easy to work with, and it's cheap, and it's abundant. So those three techniques allow me then, from my mold, to produce an arm and put all these, and then all I have to do is assemble them into the wax. And the brilliant part is, let's say somebody wants another one of these, but they want the arm this way. I don't have to start from scratch. I can take my wax model and I can distort that arm very easily and model it. Almost like how you assemble mannequins today. You can do that with this technique. The idea is there are, from Herculaneum, these very famous dancers, right? They're all virtually from the same mold. They just change how they arrange the arms. And then, of course, change the details of the face or the hair. Very easy to do in wax. And now you have something that looks very individual, but the reality is I've gotten 90% of the way there using the same mold. So that's something I like to call semiserialization. And this is the right medium for that, and that's why they liked it in antiquity. Most importantly, because you can express yourself. Secondly, you can produce. That's significant because you can produce in a small scale or a big scale or an in-between scale. It's a beautiful medium. However, it doesn't survive. When you think about antiquity, you think about these sizes. This is in a domestic, rich domestic context, but you have it in religious context, you have it in civil context, you have it in your private, public context. Every context you're going to have bronzes, whether they be sculptures, revetments on walls, on temples, you name it, it's everywhere. So you have to imagine that something like this was commonplace to a great degree. Thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of these types of sculptures. Not this particular one, but bronze sculptures everywhere you went in antiquity. Okay? Today, we have maybe 40 or 50. So if you think about that, you go from millions down to 40 or 50. That is why working on something like this is scary, but it's also incredibly important because we have to get as much information as we can about something that, in essence, is gone from us. The reason that it's gone from us is just like today, the metal's too valuable. Historically, people didn't understand these necessarily as the value we associate with them today. It's a material. Somebody's already done the hard work by mining and refining it. So all I got to do is melt this down. If I need a cannon or I need something else, ready-made. The baldacchino in the Vatican, so the canopy, the cover over the altar, tons and tons of ancient sculptures melted down to make that. Okay? It's Bernini. You're not going to touch a Bernini, but Bernini didn't have a problem touching an ancient sculpture, right? Or several of them. So if you think about the fact that this was something that was very commonplace that today doesn't survive for that very simple reason. This one does survive. And this is why it's very important, because bronze, from being ubiquitous, really only comes to us from two contexts. Oops, I got ahead of myself about. These are the Riace bronzes, okay? These are from the toe of Italy. These are underwater finds. I'm sorry that I'm going to be talking about things that are very dark, so I'm glad you've lowered the lights. I hope you can see those. This is Riace figure A, Riace figure B. It may be the other way around, but they're A and B. These are very distinct. These are believed to be Greek, ancient Greek bronze sculptures, being brought from Greece to Rome on a ship that sank off basically in between Sicily and the toe of Italy, and were found by fishermen in the 70s. Very significant, one, because, look at the absolute beauty of these pieces, but also these are believed to come from the same mold. They look very different, don't they? These, you would say, two very distinct figures, but again, you've used the same mold change the posture slightly, the rotations of the arms, the inclination of the legs, all of this tweaked, makes it individual. And then you can work on the details of the facial hair, the eyebrows, these things. That's pretty easy to do. So again, maximum result. I won't say minimum application, but you don't have to start from scratch. This is why you love the material of bronze. Now, what does bronze actually look like? First of all, I should have said bronze is a copper alloy. Okay? We say bronze, we really should be saying copper alloys. That basically means it's predominantly copper mixed with other metals. Okay? Bronze traditionally, when we're talking about in a classical context, is a binary, sometimes a tertiary, so that means 2 or 3 metals combined, overwhelmingly being copper and tin. That makes a classic bronze, okay? And that would typically be in the realm of 85 to 90% copper, somewhere between 10 and 1% of tin, and you usually have a little bit of lead in there for good effect. Lead helps with fluidity and therefore for the pouring of them. Roman bronzes tend to be seen as higher leaded, sometimes up to 15%. Greek, 0, 1 to 2%. The percentage of tin that you add has a very significant effect on the actual color of the metal. We all carry pennies around, or at least I do. We all know what pennies look like. What they look like when they're new, what they look like with time, right? They start looking pretty reddish, very warm color, and they eventually turn slightly brown, this beautiful sort of golden brown, a natural patina as the metal oxidizes or is subjected to sweat, slightly different pH materials, in particular acids. It takes on a patina. When we look at bronzes, we see a patina and we say, yeah, that means it's old. Okay? That's a trick. Patina really is meaning old in these cases. In this instance, because they were from underwater, so they were in a very high salinity, which accelerates things. But these figures, of course they look ancient, but this is not how they looked in antiquity. So again, it's like when we look at sculptures being white. Misnomer, no. There were white portions, but oftentimes polychromy, or the application of color, was very significant. And again, like all those millions of bronzes now condensed down to very few examples, it's the same with color. On marbles, they traditionally were painted. Bronzes, what did they actually look like? This is, to some degree, the holy grail of what did these actually look like. We look at the alloys, because at basically 2 to 4% tin, you have a very reddish looking metal. 4 to 6, 4 to 7, you have this beautiful golden metal. And up between 8 and 12% of tin, it starts to look very silvery. But by playing with those alloys, you can get a different result, a different look. That, for sure, in my mind, that's what they're going for. They're choosing alloys very particular for their chromatic effect. And I say that because look at their lips. Doesn't it look like his lips are red? Because that's almost pure copper. That's very intentionally done. The alloy here is different than the alloy here. The nipples are a higher percentage of copper. They're calling out things chromatically. If they're going to do it by simply coloring these things, they don't have to use a different alloy. Now, they can patina them in a sense of they can trick them with heat and with acids to oxidize them with the application of heat, or by putting certain chemicals. You basically take a natural phenomenon, which is patinization, and you accelerate it down to moments. They could do that. But the reality is, why are you going to go through the trouble of doing things like this if you can just do that with a chemical application? So these are very intentionally selected. You also see the eyes. These are intended to look real, not green, not to look like the Hulk, right? These are intended to look real. So looking at the alloys of a lot of bronzes, the reality is they were meant to look very golden, that with the applications of oils over time as their maintenance, they took on a beautiful tanned look. Idealized male nudity, or nudity in general, or the figure, with, again, the skin called out. And in some instances, you could put gilding, silver or gold, and this here, bone or ivory, glass. They were meant to look real, alive. That's something, again, understand when you look at a bronze, that is what was intended in antiquity. That is not what we see today. Keep that in mind, And then when we talk about the satyr, there's something else we have to talk about related to how he looks. Okay, so bronzes, again, 40 examples. They're pretty much the rarest of the rare because they come from really only 2 contexts anymore. If they were found, historically, they were melted down. Very rarely does somebody have the foresight to say, oh, wow, that I need to hold on to for posterity. Instead, it was, that metal can serve me, okay? So this tends to be the context in which most of them are found. These 2 figures, again, underwater recovery by fishermen. Pulled them up in nets, okay? Beautiful, beautiful treatment done on these because they looked far worse than this. Understand, they don't come out from the ocean floor looking like this. They have barnacles, they have marine growth, they look hideous. But one of the things that I also want to, you see here? When you look at something like this, how much do you think he weighs? Call it out, somebody. Wow, pretty good. 1650. That's right. Come on down. However, this is 1,500 pounds. This is 150 pounds. Okay? We think again, just like with marble, it's heavy. No, this is stone and it's heavy. He weighs around 95 pounds. That's what he should weigh. 95 pounds of copper is a lot of copper. Think about the number of pennies you have to melt down to do that. Then you put it in context and say, but at the same time, look what I get when all it has to do is be this thick. It's pretty genius, right? I get a full figure that's really just a shell. Okay, now they can be anywhere from 2 millimeters up to about 6 millimeters, depending. Okay, oftentimes in your wax application, whether you're pouring it in molten, whether you're laying it in sheet, or in something that's been dissolved and letting it set up. And sometimes they'll make them thicker or thinner in places, depending on where it's close to a weld. And I'll explain all that hopefully, but this is the major context from which these are recovered. There literally was a bronze found off the coast of Turkey 6 months ago. Not something that happens every day though. The Riace bronzes, the 70s. This is actually off the coast of Croatia. This was found about 10 years ago. So these are pretty rare. Most people can say, Uluburun, that's off Turkey, Madia off Tunisia, Antikythera off Greece, Brindisi off the eastern coast of Italy, and Riace, the tip, and then you do have 1 or 2 off of the coast of Sicily, over by Marsala, the western coast. That's it. All from shipwrecks. Again, freaks of nature. The fact that a ship got caught in a storm or didn't quite navigate properly and sank. Otherwise, gone. The other context is terrestrial, anything found on land, but again, if they were found or they were known, they were melted down, except 2 big exceptions. It's in the title of the talk. Herculaneum, Pompeii. We all know Pompeii, we all know Herculaneum because they're so well preserved. But again, like a ship sinking, it's a freak of nature. Those were buried in a day. So they're significant not because we're coming across the archaeological remains of a city that had a zenith and then was invaded or had the plague hit or something and basically was lost to posterity, or people built on top. We had a city that was buried in 2 days. Very differently between Pompeii and Herculaneum, but 2 days you basically had daily life flash frozen. So that's very significant in terms of the study of what the ancient life was actually like. Not just for the inhabitants, but what do the buildings look like? The revetments are on them, the decorative layout of how they placed their sculptures. The Villa dei Papiri is very significant because, again, a very wealthy private residence, but we virtually know the whole sculptural layout. What sculpture was placed where. And it's not haphazard, purely that looks good there. There's a whole philosophy, at least in that instance, that's based on Epicurean philosophy, that people believe that's why they're placing certain sculptures in certain places. So I already, again, jumped the gun like I did with the other one. This is a historic photograph, very blurry, I apologize. This is of the Effabo, or youth, from the Via Abbondanza. So this is the excavation, the very beginning of the 20th century in Pompeii. This is what it's like to excavate there, right? I won't say it's easy, but in essence, things, you can just pull them right out of the ground to a great degree because most of this is pumice that's come down, okay? It's compacted, but it's come down from the sky in small to medium to large granules and settled and then compacted, literally enveloped things, okay? Herculaneum is different, very different. So, I actually anticipated that one right. This is an aerial, I guess, satellite image of the Bay of Naples. Naples being right here, the most densely populated part of Europe and one of the most amazing cities on the planet. This is the part of the Bay of Naples. Here's Pompeii. Here's Herculaneum. Portici is indicated because that has significance to the figure we're going to talk about. And here's Mount Vesuvius, okay? And there's the famous caldera, right? 79 AD, traditionally dated to August 24th or August 25th. Vesuvius explodes. Boom. 1 p.m. in the afternoon, roughly. And again, unlike most things archaeologically, we know the day, we know the time, roughly, because we have Pliny the Younger, who basically writes a letter about his uncle Pliny the Elder, very significant author from antiquity, who basically launched a rescue mission. Describes this weirdness and all these things that are happening in the sky and what it does, and that his uncle goes down here to Stabia, goes here, ultimately here, and succumbs basically to being killed by poisonous gases, okay? But we have a first-hand account of somebody who saw the eruption, so we know the year, and we traditionally said we knew the date, August 24th, August 25th. A lot of more recent studies actually place it more towards late autumn, early winter. So October, November, maybe into early December. That's by looking at the pollen in the soil, saying, this plant is actually at this point. It's not in August. But significantly, Herculaneum, right on the coast. Pompeii, a little inland. Southeast, southwest, almost due west, but southwest. This is very important because of the way in which the volcano erupted. Also, when we talk about Pompeii and Herculaneum, you go to Pompeii today, you see a city, okay? It's not fully excavated, fortunately, but you go there and you see the various forums and you walk the streets and the amphitheater and the gymnasium and you see a city. But you see a city of one story. You go to Herculaneum and you see 4 city blocks, okay? You don't see a city, you see a little section of a city, but you see it 2, 3, and 4 stories. You see the vertical stratification of the city, not the ground floor of the city. Part of that is due to the fact in which how they were buried, and therefore how they were preserved. So Pompeii being south and Herculaneum being west, also the types of city are different. This is a rich seaside town. Elites or fairly wealthy people. This is, again, middle class, some upper class, and some lower class, larger, mid-city. Very different in terms of the demographics and also the types of finds. So it's significant when you combine the two. But they are very different. The reason being, again, Herculaneum here, Pompeii here, when Vesuvius erupted, this basically being all of the hot gases and all of the debris thrown up into the air, so this is the cloud, this rains down. Prevailing winds tend to blow south, southeast in the Bay of Naples. Pompeii is south. So it takes all the light stuff and pushes it this way. So Pompeii, again, say 1 p.m., from 1 p.m., let's call it the 24th, till 8 a.m. the next day, this is just somewhat of a supposition, Pompeii gets 3 meters of pumice and ash. 3 meters, almost 10 feet. It's enough of the weight that it starts, think of putting 10 feet of snow on your roof. It starts collapsing the buildings down this way, right? Over here, you got a few centimeters of ash. It pushed everything this way. So you say, okay, wow, makes it easier to excavate. That's also why you find the plaster cast bodies in Pompeii, because again, these people are buried very progressively. They're killed basically by gases and by temperature, but then they're very slowly buried. Aeration can happen, so air can get into that soil, so the organics decay. The skeletons stay there, but in essence, they leave a hollow impression that when they're excavating, they figured out and they started finding little holes. If you pour plaster in, you fill it up, and once you excavate away, wow, I see a body. I basically am seeing the positive that has become a negative. In Herculaneum, what happens instead is, as you get up in here, the heavier stuff, which doesn't go as high, every now and then collapses, right? Comes down. Under its own weight, collapses and comes down this way. That's what they call a pyroclastic flow. We're in Santa Barbara. I know a few years ago you had these horrendous mudslides a little south of here. Think of that. But it's not from moisture getting into the soil and mobilizing it. It's all of this massive temperature and gas. So think of a tremendous mudslide that's boiling. So you have an incredibly hot mudslide that's coming at you. And that's what took Herculaneum. So when, rather than kind of raining down, it comes in and just envelops the city violently. Okay? I say that because this is a picture of one of the Suburban Bats in Herculaneum. See this doorway? What do you see there? That's rock. That came right through the door and filled up that room. Just like in an avalanche, right? But it's a hot avalanche. This is actually an impression of the water basin that stood right by the window, was thrown when it came through the window across the room and pinned to the wall. You can still see how high it went up in the wall. This here being parts of the pyroclastic flow. Notice the tool marks. You have to cut, it's just stone. You have to cut this out like stone. Cool thing is you see these pieces here? Those are impressions of the glass that got thrown into the basin as it came through the window. But it shows you the force to blow the windows out and take this massive stone basin and throw it all the way across the room, pin it and fill it. That's indicative of what's happening at Herculaneum. This is Herculaneum. Again, this is Pompeii, one story. This is Herculaneum, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Mind you, these are modern shelters. They didn't have these types of skylights in antiquity as far as I know. But this is the height that you're seeing. This is the modern ground level, okay? This is actually the beach, the ancient beach. We're not even nowhere near the beach here. There's so much earth came down this way, it moved the coastline 0.5 kilometer west. So Herculaneum all of a sudden was a seaside resort that became inland, okay? To excavate this is an open pit, open trench excavation. This is like being in a quarry. Coming in, cutting through that, to then come across something and reveal it. Not with a trowel, chisels, saws, okay? Very different, very labor intensive. Why? You only have 4 blocks, but you have 4 blocks, not streets at one level. This is again showing you that this is the modern city of Herculaneum right above it, but again, you can see the differential. 75 to 80 feet that it's buried. Now the Villa dei Papiri is in Herculaneum, or it's north of Herculaneum. This is part of the 4 insulae at Herculaneum. The Villa dei Papiri would be that way. Still to this day, you see a small corner of it. That's it. And that corner was revealed in the 90s. The excavations that took place in Herculaneum, and significantly, or what more germane to what we're talking about here, at the Villa dei Papiri, were all done by tunnel. Herculaneum was actually found in 1709, is when it was discovered. The city, not the Villa dei Papiri. The Villa dei Papiri is actually found in 1750. And in both instances, because somebody's out digging a well. They're looking for water. They're digging straight down, and you all of a sudden come across a floor, or you come across part of a ruin. You don't come across water. In 1709, that's what alerted, they were actually digging in Resina, which is close to this area, and found decorative marble pieces, brought them up, showed them to the local viceroy, basically to the royal family, or viceroy of the royal family there. And they were very intrigued by it, but it's so labor intensive and so difficult to get at, they really didn't start excavating Herculaneum until 20 years later. Very fraught, very difficult. The actual wells to access down are basically 3 feet wide. 3 feet, 75 feet straight down. 75, 80 feet. That's just to get you down there. Now you got to start tunneling, okay? The tunneling, as you can see here, at most 1.8 meters, 1.7 meters wide. 3 feet wide by 5.5 feet tall. That's what you're excavating with oil lamps, chisels, picks. So again, not usually done by a bunch of grad students or enthusiastic college kids who are out excavating. This is being done by convicts and conscripts. Okay? But these are the conditions they're excavating in. Again, 75, 80 feet below the surface. So again, it's not just, oh, I find things, there's always a danger of collapse. Most of this is being done, of course, 1738 is really when they start excavation of Herculaneum. The Villa di Papiri is actually found in 1750. They really start excavation in earnest in 1751 under the Swiss military engineer, that just rolls off the tongue, Karl Weber. Fortunately, Karl Weber was a very fastidious engineer, which means he drew things and he measured things. So this is actually called Weber's plan. And what this does here, this is actually where they first came down. This is what they call the Belvedere, the Belvedere. This is actually, if you go to the villa, the floor in the Temple of Heracles is a replica of the original carved marble floor they found here, which is today preserved in the Naples Archeological Museum. This is the principal or main tunnel that was dug. And all of these are ancillary tunnels, okay, or auxiliary tunnels. Where you see this, they came across a really nice piece of floor, so they open the galleries, they take it out. But think about it. Find a big sculpture, bronze or marble. One, you know it's gone through a massive pyroclastic flow that's come in, several layers of it. Smacked it, right? Maybe not just standing still, being happy like it might be in Pompeii, but two, once you excavate it, you reveal it, how do you get it out? You got to move it down those tunnels and bring it up to the surface. All things to consider. The great thing is Weber took fastidious notes. And every week, he's writing an inventory of what's coming out of the ground. And he's updating this. 14 years he's doing this, right? 14 years building on this map. This is, if you go to the villa, the Getty Villa today, shameless plug, more or less, this is what you're looking at. This is the fish pond that we call the outer peristyle. This is the inner peristyle. And this here is the library that gives the Villa dei Papiri its name. I call it the Villa dei Papiri, it's easier for me to say. The Villa of the Papyri. The reason that the Villa dei Papiri is so significant, again, we all know it's flash frozen in a day, and basically buried to be discovered, so you have daily life imprisoned in that stone. But most importantly, this right here is the only, shall we say, semi-intact library that survives from the classical world. That's really what gives it its name. The papyri were basically books. Imagine if you just wiped all the books we have today off the face of the earth, and you come across somebody's private home that has their private library. That's what this signifies. That's what this is. Now, though, this is the Greek library. There's a Latin library, probably somewhere over here, still not excavated. Believed to still be there, but they have not gone back to go for it, to look for it. Because again, this is all still buried. Very fraught to get at. But significantly, he took all these notes, so we know the fine spots of a lot of the objects he pulled out, particularly the statues. So the Drunken Seder, the sculpture that I'll finally get around to talking about, we know is actually found right about here. Where you saw him, I'm going to give you whiplash here, right there. So if you go to the villa today, it isn't happenstance why we've placed the sculptures in the garden the way that we have. Even the plantings of the garden are based off the scholarship of the time and the scholarship that's advanced since then. So this is a fairly faithful representation aesthetically of what you would have seen. Not fully, but at least in terms of this sculpture, the Drunken Satyr, and the one down here, the Sleeping Satyr, the Sleeping Faun. Yeah, that's where they were found, more or less, if you were to come across them in antiquity. I mentioned that Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD. So August 24th, 25th, 79 AD. Villa, 1st century BC. Eruption, 79 AD. Weber excavating starting in 1750, 1751. The Satyr found July 14th, 1754. Pretty amazing. We know the day, we know the year. Not something you ever really get to come across with archaeological materials. So this is important as to what it represents about antiquity. The papyri, the decorative scheme of a private villa, and the actual pieces themselves. So again, hyperbole or superlative upon superlative upon superlative. Importantly as well, we're now in 18th century Naples. 18th century Naples is part of the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, or the Kingdom of Sicily and Naples. Basically, it's the Bourbon kings. It's an offshoot of a French royal family that marries into the Spanish. It's way too complicated. But in essence, there is a royal presence there. And as we all know, whether you go visit the Louvre, or you go visit the Prado, or you go visit any of these significant museums, when you're royal, you command, and you've got money, and you can get things done. These excavations are all being done under the auspices of Charles VII. He's basically the king of Naples at that time, for his private collection at the Regia di Portici. Portici, which is indicated on the map right here. Regia means royal residence. You had a summer house. Not really a house, I'd love it. Basically, think of Versailles sitting right here. That's actually that green space. It's now part of the modern University of Naples. The biology and botanics are based, the faculties are based there. So these pieces are actually being sponsored. The excavation of Pompeii, found in 1748, Herculaneum starting to be excavated in 1738. He dedicates the ground floor, at least 17 rooms, to the finds that come up. Now, of course, they're not coming up fully intact. So you then are employing legions of restorers to restore these pieces, to put them on display in his private residence. But the word starts getting out about the type of things they're finding. And so the most learned, the most curious, the wealthiest are all wanting to get to see this. I don't know if some of you have heard of Winckelmann, Johann Winckelmann. Johann Winckelmann is very significant to the development of art history, and in particular, the understanding of the classical world in art history, and to spreading, again, the Renaissance is the rediscovery of antiquity. In the 18th century, you have art history really starting as a study. And Winckelmann is very germane to that. He's sort of, not the Big Bang, but he's really close to that. And this stuff that's coming up is really where he's based in Rome, where again, things are coming out. You have the Pope, so again, kind of like a king, has the money, can excavate things that are under your feet. You have the same thing happening here, and he starts publishing these things, and it is explosive throughout Europe. In terms of neoclassicism, really starts in the 19th century, late 18th century, because of what's happening here. These are the pieces that people are looking at, and they're writing about, and they're saying, this is what life was like in antiquity. And that's what starts it all anew, and where we get to directly to today, in terms of our understanding of things. So again, you have the specifics of antiquity, and you have the specifics of 18th century Naples, all overlaid. And every one of them, we know a great deal about. So it really allows us to sort of look at how things were done and peel back that onion in a way that's very difficult to do. Usually you do it purely out of supposition. Here, we can look at the physical evidence and tie it into very specific things. That's very rare. All right, so July 14th, 1754. Old Silenus on a tiger skin is pulled from under the soil, right? Basically brought up. This is an illustration of the Drunken Seder in 1771. 1754, terminus antiquem, the date from which everything starts. 1771, we know he's on a rock and he's on his lion skin. He looks like this. So terminus postquem, the date at which nothing more happens. 1754, 1771, we know that basically he's brought out of the ground and he's fully restored. I've got a lot of dates now to play with, right? But I have a date of antiquity and I have a date of middle of the 18th century. That's what I have, and I need the material evidence to tell me what is what, so that I can then understand what I'm looking at and potentially what issues there are, and then make an educated decision as to what needs to be done. Okay? 1771 illustration, 2019 photograph. He's done pretty well. I hope I aged that well over 200 years. Doesn't look that different. But what's significant is when you actually start to look at this, this is Herculaneum Pompeii, right? There's nothing more pure from antiquity. These are straight from August 24th, 79 AD, right? That's where the investigations get interesting, because you look at this and you say, that's an ancient bronze, which it is. But this is actually very much an 18th century conception of an ancient bronze. So you have an ancient bronze with the 18th century put on it. So now you have two very distinct lives that you walk in and say, oh, ancient. That's significant in terms of how people look at things art historically. Think about Winckelmann. He's looking at that and he's disseminating it. The reality is that it's both, right? Now we can finally get to the figure. So hopefully it's been somewhat interesting. Okay. All right, so object comes into the lab. I'd love to go through the whole thing about taking out in Naples. If you guys are still awake at the end, I can do some of that and show you some pictures. But the reality is, as conservative, the idea is that this piece was loaned in anticipation of a special exhibition that we did in 2019 about the Villa dei Papiri. Again, how cute. A show about the Villa dei Papiri in a modern replica of the Villa dei Papiri, right? But the idea is that we borrowed significant objects, some of which potentially couldn't be loaned because they had conservation issues, this being chief among it. So this piece was lent for study and treatment so that it could travel to California and back to Italy, okay? So a lot of the advanced legwork was going to Naples, spending time with the piece, working with other individuals. Because again, one thing, I can stand up here as a lone individual. Anything you see in an exhibition is the result of massive collaboration and tons of different people, all with different skills. But the idea here was to understand what the issues are so they can be rectified enough to get the piece safely to Los Angeles without any change or damage. To then do the full study, do the treatment that needs to be done to guarantee the preservation of this piece and the stability of this piece. But in order for me to do that, I have to basically look at the piece. Did all that work, bring it into Naples, and now I bring it into California. I have this piece before me. I now have to understand as much as I can everything about this piece, from the moment of its creation up to the time it comes into the lab. I need to, as much as I can, define all of that. So I need to define, how is this piece made? What was it made of, and how was it made? And if I can determine that, how has that changed? Naturally, because we know, one, it was put on display in antiquity, in water, or at least with water around it, and it was then enveloped and buried in a very traumatic event, and then sat for 2 millennia, or not quite, 1600 years, 1700 years, subterranean. Then is brought to light, and then is treated from 1754 to 1771. We know that some treatments have happened. And then some pieces were absconded from the museum during the German occupation of the Italian peninsula in World War II. And then afterwards were brought down to Italy. And that's the last time this collection was really touched. 1754, 1771, 1948, 49. Immediately after World War II. So what am I seeing in front of me? So the first thing to do, and the easiest and the cheapest thing to do, is to use my eyes and start looking at this piece. Start looking at it in direct light, indirect light, figuring out ways to try to see, is there anything I can differentiate and interpret? So, right knee. You can see things like this, irregular lines, very irregular patches, circles, and again, left thigh, a very irregular line, a little bit of a darker patch. I really don't speak this simplistically, but I'm trying to make this. The nipple, see these? See all of these? I have evidence here of chiseling and rasping. Files and rasps and very clearly chisels. I'm seeing evidence here of something being damaged, and here something being physically removed. Okay? However, well, and again, more of these types of marks, see this differentiates. We see all of this with a raking light. I can see a lot of the surface morphology. And I can see a regular patch, and again, one of these, but again, these fracture lines and all of these. This is a file. Chisels, files, rasps, mechanical cleaning techniques. So I know the surface has been mechanically cleaned. So more than likely, and I know it's been scratched, usually when you scratch metal, it becomes very bright and lustrous. It's not. So it's probably been repatinated. Okay? This is not the ancient surface, and it's certainly not the surface after they removed whatever was on it, the corrosion products or the incrustation of the envelopment. Also see things like this, but importantly, wow, there's been a shift here. And then you see these surfaces, and these surfaces don't really look the same. Pretty smooth and homogeneous, pretty irregular by comparison. And then you look more carefully and you say, I see things like this, where this side of it, I have a certain type of working, and I have certain type of surface morphology and color that here I don't. And here again, very irregular lines that on this side looks one way, and on this side I have chromatically something very different. More in line with corrosion. So what does that basically tell me? It tells me this. This is my ancient figure. This is my 18th century. So what you're looking at when you look at this, now this is my supposition, but this is what those differences are telling me. Here's my ancient figure. Here's my 18th century that they've added on. That's pretty significant. How you interpret this piece is really a lot based on this. Now, Drunken Seder, I should have broken that down for you a little bit. He's laying on a lion skin. You can see from the lion's face, this actually is ancient, except for the jowl here. This here is called an otre, which is a wineskin. Basically, it's full of wine. He's basically inebriated, and he's fallen back on his wineskin. That's partially empty, going, I'm good. Okay? But quite beautiful. You see he's middle-aged, got this lax belly. But look at the beautiful working of these legs, the musculature, how vivacious they are. So really, you have this chrysalis of a moment where flesh is moving and is also tense. So you have a slack and a taut, all in one moment. Again, that's tough to do in a marble. Bernini can do it, and a few others, Michelangelo. But in a bronze, you have this frozen moment, which is pretty amazing. But again, all of this, is that true to how it looked in antiquity? We know that this is ancient, but was he laying further back? It's actually very interesting if you look at the opposite piece. If you go to the Getty Villa, we have what they call the sleeping faun. So again, this is an older Silenus, an older satyr. Then you have a younger one, and he's on a rock, he's sleeping. And he's laying down because he's sleeping. You go see the ancient piece in Naples, and he's sitting up like he's doing a crunch. How you display them has very big significance as to how you interpret them and how you interact with them. So this one here, 18th century, but is it indicative? Is the role of the body, is it the inclination of this, is that how it was in antiquity? Importantly here, this is a supposition of mine. Oops, I think I just got a little ahead of myself. Sorry, I'll come back to this. So again, 18th century ancient, portion of this ancient. This, probably not ancient, probably 18th century. No, it is 18th century. So you have about 55% of this is actually ancient. 45 is 18th century. Then looking at specifically this here, I start seeing these. Right? These are different ones. Big fat circles that have had some types of fills put over top with slots. And then where I see these very fine lines, I also see these circles. I hope you guys can see those in the back. Yeah? Okay. See them here and here. But I also have like this dribbling here, these lines. Okay. Interesting. But they're very regular. Then I start seeing them on the ancient. And that's what's actually being pointed out here. These very regular circles. Here, here, here. Everywhere you have those purple triangles. And then here, remember that, look at that morphology, and then look at over here how smooth it is. I was going to say, look how smooth that's rock. Look how smooth that is. And how rough that is. But then all of these different regular circles that happen to always be either side of fairly regular lines or irregular lines. These are, those big ones, anchor points as to how those are tied down to the stone. And the small ones call out all the different seams of metallurgical work. So all of this here is made up of roughly 18 individually cast fragments to make up the drapery that are then brought together And then they are metallurgically joined, but not very well. And significantly, this is basically a form of riveting. Not in the way that we understand rivets, I'll show you once we get inside, but also this technology is what they're using in here and in other places. So it's also how they're repairing the antique. Let me unpack a little bit what I've just said. You know then you have an ancient to ancient join. You have an ancient to 18th century join, and you have an 18th century to 18th century join. 3 different types of join types. So all of this informs what I have to actually look at and make decisions about. Metallographically, is this good? Chemically, physically, is it stable? The metal in and of itself. How has it altered? And then importantly, what is the relationship of each to the other? Are those joins stable? Okay? This is what I wanted to get at before. Again, I got ahead of myself. 18th century. In my mind, this is one of my favorite pieces. This is a Neapolitan response, and a darn good one, to this piece here. This is the Barberini font, found in 1620 in Rome. One of my favorite pieces. This is in the Glyptothek in Munich now. It no longer looks like this. They de-restored it. This piece, again, the Barberini fawn, satyr, we're in the same group here, sleeping on an animal skin in a rocky environment, very dynamic, right? 1620 is when this comes to light and is then restored, as you can see all the restoration pieces. See it? Again, that idea of things being known, you get a call, you get a response. That's why this is all so significant. It's also significant about the work the conservator does. The decisions we make will have implications far beyond today. Whatever we change, whatever we take away, you see it has, I don't want to call it the butterfly effect, but you can see just from this. These things, like a ripple in a pond, magnify and spread out. Interesting so far? Okay, so that's using the eyes. Now we're going to try to get down to the nitty-gritty and say, this is what I think. Can I actually find something that helps me focus that further and say whether I'm right or wrong, or at least more probably, or have a greater plausibility? So I want you to again look at the face, see the eyes like we saw with the Riace bronzes. They're called out, right? So are the teeth. Notice he's missing his teeth. Because again, middle-aged, drunkard, lived. It's not a drunkard, but the wild side of human nature, right? That's what he's representing. And you can see from here, and here we're basically using a video microscope up close to be able to look at these things. His teeth were a different color. He wasn't smoking and boozing. This is basically not silver. They put tin on the teeth. It's bronze, but they've had tin applied to bring out, again, a chromatic effect of being silvery white. You would have seen it from afar. Think about 20 feet away, because again, he's in the middle of the pond. These things would have called out. See the incision around the lips? See the redness? Again, you're getting that same thing. They are chromatically calling these things out. White teeth, red lips, white eyes. This happens to be cow bone. So we did a peptide analysis of this. It's bone, not ivory, and it actually turns out to be bovine. This being recessed here, again, you're either going to put a piece of stone or a piece of glass in there. So the pupils, again, chromatically it's telling you he didn't look like this in the middle of that pond. He looked probably very suntanned, but that's what he probably looked like in antiquity. Beyond that, now using another technique. So this is basically using microscopes, digital microscopes, using different light sources, direct, indirect, changing the angle of the light, just sort of piecemeal this out. Also using ultraviolet light, different range of the visible light spectrum, okay? One end, infrared being one end, ultraviolet being the other. They'll tell you different things. Infrared really for paintings, not so much for this. The ultraviolet basically is going to allow anything that's organic to fluoresce. So he looks like this under regular light, and I all of a sudden put him under UV light. I didn't see that before. It's like CSI, right? Turn on that light in the room. What I'm seeing here is all the organic. This is a mastic that's been applied. And if you look at it, where has it been applied? It's been applied in the join between the ancient to the 18th century. This is my bond, right? This is significant as to what ancient to historic. This part of the altar being ancient. So ancient to historic. That's my join. That's organic. Okay, it's not been done metallurgically, unlike, say, all those in here which are riveted. Then looking specifically at that, you can see all the mastic that's been applied in the areas in which it's failed. See it? This is not after I've been playing with it. This is where it's already failed and fallen out. This is where it's in the process of cracking. This is organic. This is not metal. Same thing here. Then, here's the thing about most things. Bronzes, again, they're being hollow. All the work that's done in antiquity, but also all the work that's done by the restorers is on the outside. You're never going to see on the inside, so they're not worrying about hiding their tricks. So if I can find access into that piece, say like with an endoscope, hopefully it reveals a lot of their tricks, but also in the same process will tell me things about the ancient manufacturer. So this is actually some endoscopic images from the inside. This being a hole that was drilled for some of those attachments. But importantly, when you look at this, what do you see? Certainly doesn't look like that, does it? That is probably what the surface looked like when it was brought up, okay? So this is why those file, chisel, rasp marks are there. This is what, this could be some of the vestiture from ancient manufacture, but more than likely a lot of this is part of that which enveloped and buried the piece. This is to a great degree aesthetically what he probably looked like. Importantly as well, I can see the natural corrosion products that would have formed. They didn't play with them. Why are you going to clean the interior? Why are you going to waste your time? So they left their evidence on the inside. One, for what they've done, but also for the state in which this bronze was when it came up. So I can basically reverse engineer to some degree from what I'm seeing here with the evidence. What you're looking at here is looking down the two legs. This is the top of the legs, and this is the pubis. So this is basically the pubic triangle from behind. What this is showing you here from antiquity is this piece is cast separately and applied. The legs are finished in the wax, as is here, and that's put on, okay? This is looking up in the chest cavity into the head, and this would be off to the right arm and the left arm. Got a lot of junk in there, right? That all becomes significant. Also looking at the surfaces, what do you see here? See that? Looks like a nice wax drip, doesn't it? Remember, translating from wax directly into metal. I have evidence for how the wax is being applied, right? Pretty cool. Also, they tend to run down, right? Potentially the orientation when that's being applied. Here, a bare metal, and significantly here, corrosion. Here's evidence of your patination process right there. They're using liquids. They're running. They're not just applying heat. They're applying heat, more than likely, to oxidize, but here is your actual patination. This is the actual chemical trace that they're applying to that surface. May not be the only one, but it's certainly one of them. Right here, you're looking at your cuprites coming out, right? That's cupric. I can see that. Now, if I can sample that, I can tell you this is more than likely this chemical being applied. So it helps me to identify the process. The cleaning, but then how they achieved that color, how they got to that surface that we now think is ancient, but is really 18th century. These are then those rivets. You know it's pre-industrial. Look at that threading. That's gorgeous. This is the form of riveting. Here are the rivets, right? Basically, they're not rivets. They drill holes through. You put in basically your bolts or your screws. And you see this? What does that look like? Anyone been to Hawaii? Doesn't that look like magma? Just cools. So they put two pieces together. See the seam right here? Would be across here. See the seam? Either side of that seam, you put in your screws through your holes. And you pour molten bronze on top and let it solidify. You've now metallographically fused a little bit under here, but importantly, you've keyed these all in place. Cast them in. Now it's held. And you see the same thing here. See that very quick cooling? That's why you have that go around. That's why that looks that way. So again, now here's their process. Oh, I put these two pieces together. I put these here. Pour on some hot metal. Now that's my metallurgical join. It's mechanical and metallurgical at the same time. More mechanical than metallurgical. And then these are the anchors to the stone. You basically have a channel stock. These are ferrous. Channel stock that basically are embedded. They're leaded into. So you've carved the stone, these two in here, and you've brought in your channel stock, and you've leaded them in place, and you've drilled and tapped them. This is how you held your pieces of the lion skin to the rock. Pretty cool. All right. I say this is ancient, this is 18th century. How can I prove that? So scientifically, when you use an XRF, X-ray fluorescence, the idea is that this is a superficial technique, non-destructive, that looks at the surface and basically can give you not all of your, basically the different elements that are involved in this, but it will give you the peaks associated with those elements. And significantly, you see the green and the red, there is a difference. If I come along and I map point, 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 basically if I have a very high peak of lead, I'm ancient. If I have a peak of arsenic, I'm 18th century. Now I have a signifier that I actually can come in and hit it by doing this technique and say, yep, ancient, yep, 18th century, because chemically, elementally, they are different. They're not the same alloy, even though aesthetically they look exactly the same. All the more evidence they've been cleaned and patinated to look identical. This is XRD, X-ray diffraction. This is actually taking a sample. You can see here, there actually is a small sample removed from there. This then scientifically is looking at a cross-section. Again, looking at different elements, looking at the corrosion in particular, and then looking at the lead, whether it's this here, showing you the surface. This is, I know it's hard to understand, but copper, tin, lead, oxygen. Copper, sulfur, lead, chlorides. This helps me understand the patination process, but also, is this really ancient? Is the corrosion that I see from the exterior working into the interior of the metal consistent with something that took millennia to develop, or something that took a few hours or days to develop? Fortunately, in this case, it was millennia. So this is what the patination would look like into the metal. See all the blue, the lead segregation? That also helps me understand the temperatures at which they're actually smelting this and pouring it. These are actually coming out. They're sweating out. So it's what they call a segregation within a tertiary alloy. Two of your alloys, so your tin and your bronze, they actually came together very well. Your lead is actually sweating out. And then if I do a certain type of cross-section, I can actually see how much cold working is being done in that with what they call twinning. Where I get these very plaid patterns in there, and that shows they've come in and cold worked on top of the hot work, okay? Another thing, again, we looked at the endoscope, the idea of looking inside to see what the outside doesn't reveal. Better yet, we're all used to going to the doctor. I can use radiography to look through these pieces, to look at the density of pieces. So here, taking individual x-rays of individual elements, I can get these particular pieces. So reading an x-ray, the idea is you're looking at radio opacity. Anything that's white is more opaque than anything that lets the x-rays pass through, okay? So you can see you're pretty dense right there, you're pretty thin right there, this being your wall thickness in here. But significant, you see this, probably an ancient repair from antiquity. Really significant, you see this bib right here. You have sort of this oval right here. Take some of this on faith, but this you don't have to. You have an oval here, an oval here, an oval here. That's a flow weld. That was where they actually put the head onto the neck and welded it. This, on the other hand, where you can see is a much greater thickness. It's radio opaque, right? It's very white. That's not a join. That's wax to wax. That's where they overlap wax. So again, your wax is thicker there, so when you translate it into your metal, so is your metal. This shows they had excised right here. So these all tell me manufacture process, flow welding, wax to wax, ancient repair. When I put each one together, I can get a full composite x-ray and look at the body. See that? That's a flow weld. That is cast separate of that. Wax to wax, flow weld. This here, we know is repaired from those rivets. Radio opaque because, again, you saw the riveting process. They're pouring in a molten bronze around those rivets. I can't get through it. But this is looking at other evidence where my join is. I have a join here, and I have a join right in here. So it means that the figure in antiquity is made in 6 major pieces, okay? The limbs, so 2 arms, the 2 legs, here's your join. The neck, so the head, so you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the torso and the head cast. But you also have then the pubic triangle, the columboi, so these up here, and some of the hair locks. So he's made in 6 major fragments with 8 auxiliary fragments, all cast separately and then brought together. That's an antiquity. So now I can look at each one of these joins and assess, is it sound? Is it good? Is it stable? This then is the damage that he incurred during envelopment. Fracturing here and here, tearing here, completely removing the arm, hence the need of the riveting, as well as the left hand. So now I know my ancient manufacture, as well as my condition, structural condition at the time of excavation. Question is this done by the envelopment, or is this done to get him up and out of the tunnels? That one's tougher to say. Okay, so all put together, 18th century, anchoring, riveting, ancient manufacture, fracturing from envelopment or excavation, and restoration. Now I have a more complete picture to start understanding and picking this piece apart to understand what are the issues here. All right. You survived so far. Everyone doing okay? Okay. So the good news is the ancient joins were still all viable and all good. The restorations here, very thick metal, they were okay. They were good. The real issues that this piece faced is when you have an interface between ancient to historic and historic to stone. That's my problem. The stone itself has its own problems. You had fracturing coming in here because you had point loading. On a big, massive piece of stone like this, that shouldn't be that big of an issue. You'll understand why shortly. But my issue is when things meet. Okay? We knew that there was a mastic here that was unstable, so that's something I got to deal with, ancient to historic. Then I have the historic to the stone, and then I have the problems with the stone itself. That, in the end, is my problems. Those are the things I have to sort out. Now, looking at that mastic, ideally, how do I deal with the relationship of those two? That here has been shown to be unstable and at some point has shifted. This was never intended. The restorers would not have done this. At some point, this piece was moved backwards, and somebody just came in and filled this joint in this way. Okay? This is probably work post-World War II, right here. That's not 18th century work that you're going to see. They would not have done something so obvious, I believe. But it's quite genius what they've done here to conceal those joins. And significantly, this piece right here, the elbow piece, actually comes up and over the elbow. It locks the whole sculpture in place. He's set down, and quite clearly that's the last piece that was put on. He can't actually come off if that's on. That's my target. That's my key to then start dealing with how do I actually alter that relationship to be more in line with what was intended in the 18th century by realigning it, which basically means I have to remove it. Now, he has not been taken off his stone for 250 years. I need to find a way to actually remove those pieces and get him off. First is to go into that piece that's keying him in. Good thing is, I can reveal those anchor points very slowly, very gradually. I take great pride, it's not scratched. Okay? But they're still viable. That's what's beautiful. Reveal them, I'm able to reverse them. And there's your anchor points. And take that off, and now I have that key, that part that's holding it down, freed and off. And now I can target the seam. Okay? Target the seam in between, and sometimes there's some great little surprises. Voila. A tram ticket from the 50s. So, like all things, people love to shove things in mouths and this and that. But, significantly, newspaper. Put in there as a backing. When I'm able to take all that out, turn it over to paper conservators, they're able to humidify it and reopen it up immediately after World War II. I know a lot of that work, probably again, when that shift, my supposition, I actually now have a newspaper with a date and a year. Now, it could have been sitting around for 10 years and they decided to reuse it. You can never rule that out. But the reality is it firmly places it into the 20th century. when this mastic at least is renewed. All right, so then the big undertaking. Now, one of my great joys, I enjoy dealing with things that are very heavy, things that are very difficult. He's not heavy, but he's very difficult. He is thin. He is compromised. You see, he's been through a lot. He's got fractures. He's got repairs. He's imbalanced. He's got parts with thick metal, parts with thin metal. He, in essence, is a very thin shell that I cannot go around. It's not like an egg where it's strong from all sides. I've only got parts of his sides. How do I pick him up? I got no access. I can't just throw a strap on him and start pulling. I'll rip him apart. So I fabricated these. The idea is that these are, in essence, they're scissors. And what they'll do, by pulling on here, the amount of pressure that's placed here is directly determined by the weight of the piece itself and the resistance I'm encountering. So I can never come in. If I were to clamp something, I can put thousands of pounds of pressure on a point. By doing it this way, that pressure is directly correlated to his actual weight or to the actual attachment he has. So I can feel the resistance in it. Fabricate these so they're adjustable, so that then I can pick them up. Nice and slow and gradually. And I'm putting 80 to 90 pounds of pressure on him. Not hundreds of pounds, not thousands of pounds. Exactly his weight on those points. But importantly, got nothing going on underneath. I put a safety under here because I'm a bit chicken sometimes. But the idea is that he's floating. Float him up, and the great thing about that is now I have the 18th century and the ancient separated. Pretty cool. First time in 250 years. Never intended to be done. Significant as to what it is we do. They did all this work never with the idea that somebody is going to have to do this work over, okay? We know better than that now. I know that whatever we do at some point will be revisited, okay? When they did this, they weren't being, what's the word I want to go for? There was nothing nefarious in what they were doing. They were doing with what was correct with the time. They were restoring this piece so that it looked like what they believed it looked like in antiquity. Okay? And they were not thinking about tomorrow. They were thinking about today. And it worked for today. But those things that are organic, or those rivets, they all started to reveal themselves and change, right, with time. I know that whatever I do will do the same. So now, whatever work I do, I will facilitate that it can be undone. Okay? That is the difference between restoration and conservation. Not the only, but a significant one. The idea of, we used to say reversibility, we now say retreatability. Because I know whatever I've done will need to be retreated. So I'm not going to necessarily do things in the same way. I will give it the maximum stability I can give it, but I will still facilitate its reversibility or its retreatability. That's significant. Anyways, back to the 18th century. Here you see the rock, roughed out but smoothed here. And all the different, it's beautiful, all the different pieces of the lion skin brought together, right? Except this one piece I pulled off here. This obviously going right up against here, locked here and locked here. So he can't move. But obviously he did, but it just can't be taken off. And then that allows me to start focusing again on those 15 anchor points, right? And you can see, look at all these sprues and vents. You know, that's part of the casting process, right? Beautiful things on this, you literally can see the orientation in which they made it. It's beautiful. But this is the ultimate, the wineskin. Ancient section, historic section. There's your join. Ancient, but look at all that corrosion in there from when they repatinated it. But also an indication of what the surface looked like when they excavated it versus something they cast specifically for this, and then how they made it. The lion's head, again, beautiful, ancient, restoration. It starts to help me see the difference, but also how they integrated those things. And then, looking at him, now I can see him in a way that he's never been seen, a way he was never intended to be seen. This shows you right here, again, he's going to be seated on something. That whole idea of, did they place him in the right position? Is it actually indicative of what he looked like in antiquity? This helps me understand that. See how regular that is under the elbow? Or how regular that is behind the legs? That's all done in the wax, right? That's not after they cast it, they came and cut that out. You don't need to translate that into bronze. It's going to sit on something. I don't need to make the underside of something you're never going to see. That's just wasted labor, wasted material. They've excised it. And then significantly, you see right here, I don't have any regularity. See how regular that is? Like that? And all here it gets really jagged? Right here. That's where I can see the force of the envelopment. Where he's been hit, this is ripped and distorted and bent. So he's basically been thrown off his rock. His rock's still somewhere in the Villa dei Papiri. But this here is the direct line right back to 79 AD. Okay? And this here, again, shows their working process in antiquity. Why this is brilliant is I cast this arm. I can remove the core material. Because again, if I leave the core material, one, it's going to have things in it I don't necessarily want. It's also going to be really heavy. It's also not going to facilitate my work to weld these things together. By doing things like this, I've created a natural place to access and pull that core out. One of the things I didn't talk about in the indirect is when you have the interior core, you have the wax, and you have the exterior vestment. The way in which you arrest the relationship between the two, you hold that relationship, is by putting what they call core pins, right, or chaplets, okay? Usually iron pins through the wax before you envelop it. And the idea is when you burn the wax out, those pins are bridges and they hold everything in place. When I do something like this, I now have a direct link between my interior and my exterior. I don't have to use core pins. So it makes the amount of cold work I have to do after the casting less. Again, economizing, very smart. Same thing here. I can here, my interior and my exterior now have points of contact. I didn't create a closed shape. I don't have to use as many chaplets to firm those two things. It's brilliant. We doing okay on time? I know I'm long. Everyone's still awake? Okay, all right. This also allows access to look up inside, okay? Again, the pubic triangle, the legs. This is the back of the face. Here's the teeth, here's the eyes, here's the nose. So I can see, again, if I'm looking at the thickness of the nose, has this done by pouring in wax? Has this been done by pushing in? Is it, again, if I'm moving a hot wax in my depressions, I should be slightly thicker in a very gradual way up to a thinner at my high points. I can see that in my radiography, but I can confirm it now by actually seeing it. Okay? The rock itself, notice this nodule, the tail curlicued around that. Notice how you have this seam right here? They cut that piece and turned it around. So they had created that. That shows the coordination between the marble carver and the restorer wasn't quite what it should have been. They carved it and it didn't fit. So they had to come in and cut it off and turn it around so that the tail curlicued around it. Okay? That's significant because there were some revelations with the stone. But the stone itself, you can see how miscolored it is. This is where the lion skin curlicued, and this is where that one paw laid over the stone. I can see all of these different applications of varnishes and waxes that have discolored over time that weren't there before, right? Here they can't get access, here they can. Built up around the edges where it's darker. These are not what they intended in terms of their color. They've obscured, they've yellowed. So this is more indicative of how you clean a painting, where the varnishes have yellowed and discolored. And again, these are organics, very similar to a varnish. So one of the things I need to start doing at that point is removing that, cleaning it. So you can see a clean side and an unclean side. How yellow and distorted and darkened, how the actual stone itself. I should say this stone is called a Bartile di Luni. This is a stone that's from Luna, northern Tuscany. We're in Naples, that's in Tuscany. Even that has implications, right? Uncleaned, cleaned. It's quite a significant difference. Again, it's more of that process, and then the uncleaned surrounded by the cleaned. You can see chromographically the differences, okay? But significantly, like this anchor point, it's fractured, okay? That in and of itself is compromised. So is the stone. See that fracture right through there? And here, and here? That's all from point loading, but again, on that massive block, I shouldn't be worried about that. Another thing was, again, lifting it, creating compression rig to lift it, so we can get underneath it. That's what the stone looks like. It's not solid. It's been hollowed out. And significantly, that fracture happened, they repaired it. And you see this line right here? See that brown versus the gray? See that? That's a tide line. This sat upside down full of water for a long time. That's all sediment that deposited. So again, When is this done? Why is this done? The coordination, we've already seen some things had to be changed, some things had to be bashed. But again, here's that repair. Plaster and slate, typical of the 18th century. This is how they backed all the frescoes and some of the mosaics that came out. So I need to deal with the fact that I have points of contact that are not uniform. I need to establish as much contact as I can to the display surface. That's part of my treatment. So that's what I'll be doing here. Taking that footprint, translate that into a very thin aluminum plate that then has other implications. Okay, so you can see that that's following the footprint, but I also brought in drilled and tapped for here and here in the front and the back. And then taken in the X and in the Y, cast the actual form. So in this way I can get a support across that shell. Think of it as a dome in the X and in the Y, and then significantly around here, take that whole edge and create a complete intimacy down to that plate. So now the display surface will be intimate to the bottom of the plate, and the piece itself intimate to the resin, and then locked in place based on these here, okay? And then you see it placed down. Now, of course, it had been varnished, it had been waxed, so I can't leave it in this state, that's not what they intended, so I now have to reapply. But now you can see how beautiful that stone is once it's been cleaned and had that reapplied. Very different, much more even. Now it's a gorgeous stone. But now you see here also, this is where the foot goes, where they've had to come in and re-chisel. So there's been this odd coordination of the piece was cut, but it wasn't right. Things being turned around, things being bashed off to get it to fit. Anyways, now I need to deal with the relationship of the 18th century to the stone, okay? So I have those anchor points, which I am going to reuse. They've done the damage. I might as well reuse it, right? But the idea is, as you saw before, where those were attached, they were floating. So basically you stuck them on and you just shot these bolts through. But they weren't very firm. So what I'm going to try to do, like with the underside of the stone, is to create an intimacy or a bed with which I can predict the relationship and manipulate the relationship between those two things by creating more support. So putting a barrier, resin, casting it against the stone. And then, as you can see here, now I've created a spatial relationship that sets the orientation of this bronze to the stone, okay? And that's what I've done with every piece, so that here you see every one of these are what we call interfaces applied for each one of those pieces of the drapery, okay? And just from a different view. Now, I don't know if you noticed here. See these bright spots? And here, these bright spots? Those are magnets. Anyone who knows me knows I love magnets. But the idea is that each one of these interfaces now also holds itself in place magnetically to those anchors. So not only have I cast that anchor so that it can't move, it also is pulled down to it by the magnetic force. So that helps just to hold that there, and now I can come through with the actual mechanical connection and retie that to the interface. So the mechanical connections, though, and we are getting towards the end, I do promise. As you can see here, before they were bolts, but they were pretty unsightly. The idea now is I can actually take that same thread count and basically make these so they can be done with a hex wrench. But I've done them in such a way that they're expanded, so that as I tie them in, they pull out onto the bronze, okay? So they hold it in place. And then this here is just simple foam, again with a barrier on it. Then I can place resin over the top, smooth it out, and integrate it. So here you're seeing all the pieces put back in place. Here, the 18th century now has that relationship reestablished in a more stable and more predictable way. And then here, now I have to look at the relationship of the ancient to the 18th century. Again, doing the same idea of creating an interface by casting it, but significantly, this being down here and up here, you see this line and this line here? What I've created, in essence, by casting that, the underside of that bronze goes like this. I'm creating a gasket, in essence, with this. And by separating them into two halves, I put springs in here that push the gaskets open. When you seat the bronze, it compresses the springs, sits him, and they come back out and lock him in. So now that gasket creates an intimacy where he's fully supported, but also locked in place. You can't move him. You can't pick him up. Unless you very specifically focus it and put the force that then displaces those in, and you can lift them off. And then just him being seated. And the last piece, again, is that elbow lock. Creating interfaces, but you have to do them in such a way that they will literally lock him down so I mechanically can take them on or off. So here, what we have and how you have to build it in. This is that fine part, that opening underneath his elbow. Cast in 2 pieces, which will allow me to set him, roll him down onto that, and then lock that last piece in. That's what that looks like as assembled. And that's actually with him in there. The one missing piece that then recreated, that was then aesthetically integrated. I don't have a picture of it. And that's the piece after each one of the relationships is done. Okay? The plate, I told you about those bolts. Those served another purpose, allowing you to either lift him or to push him off that surface. This is important for installation and deinstallation. He is going to have to travel to the gallery. He's going to have to go into a crate. He's going to have to go back to Italy. This allows you to do that in a way that's easily applied and easily removed, and you no longer have to touch the piece to reduce the risk. So here, very quickly, casting those, and then you can see the ones in the back with lifting rings, the rigging setup, and you can now lift him in a very controlled, easy manner, which means it takes about 5 minutes to put him on display. And importantly, that's him on display. Now I can stop there, or I can talk another 5 or 10 minutes. It's up to you guys. You want more? Yes. All right, you guys are the survivors. Okay. All right. So that, in essence, I boiled it down really simplistically, but that's the treatment. Fortunately, I did have to clean the surface. As you notice, it does look a little different than it did before. I have actually tried to call out the difference between the ancient and the historic in the actual sheen of it, how I cleaned it. One being more matte, one being a little bit more sateen. But in essence, the integration is there. Now you now see the piece and appreciate the piece without all the scratches, without all the things having discolored or changed shape. Packing and crating, okay? So again, that idea of thinking of tomorrow, this is at the moment of deinstallation in Naples. Okay, so this is when we took him off display so that he could be crated in the museum and then transported to Los Angeles. Not an easy process. And as you can see here, this is this slat crate we had to build for him. It worked, but I don't like to work in this manner. This here, all of these wires you're seeing here, because this is part of what we're doing, we're actually doing studies on these as we move them around the world so that we can actually see, we have an accelerometer and a vibration sensor in these. So we put those on the conveyance, we put them on the exterior of the crate, on the interior crate, and on the object. So we can see what the conveyance is doing, whether that's a truck, whether that's a pallet jack, a truck, an airplane, what the exterior of the crate is doing, what the interior of the crate is doing, what the object is doing, so that we can better figure out how we can move and manipulate these things. Because this is basically how museums loan objects. This is important. It's very hard on objects. So oftentimes people say, sorry, I'm not going to loan it to you. It's too risky. We can at least try to predict or at least reduce the amount of risk. That helps with basically how museums deal with each other. It's also one of my big interests as well. It's not just moving things, but also moving them, how you move them around and creating. So this is what we had to create in Italy. This is all done in plywood. Less than ideal, and you can see all the bracing and cross bracing just to try to make the slat crate rigid. But ultimately, it's being tied down, that rock is being tied down by these ratchet straps, okay, onto foam. This then stabilizes the arm. This stabilizes the leg, the two parts that are cantilevered out, right? Just another view of it. This then, lower part of the exterior crate, with this what's called sorbothane. This is a type of rubber that we'll put in between. We can, knowing the weights that we have to support, we actually have this special manufactured. The actual density of it is specific to the number of points and the weight that it has to support. The idea is that these, in essence, are shock absorbers for vibration, but also from actual shock. We have them here on the exterior crate. We have them here on the slat crate to the inner crate, okay? Then you have the inner crate made, and the inner crate has them as well. So in essence, this piece is floating in shock absorbers, and the crate itself is floating on shock absorbers. And the fun part, this is the part I love, this is taking it out of the museum, okay? You think it's easy here. We're designed to do these things. We design our spaces, as Santa Barbara just recently redid, with a loading dock, with a freight elevator that allows you to come on level with what you need. Most museums in Europe are in historic buildings that were not designed for what they're actually being used for. So to take out a piece that weighs 1,650 pounds, plus all the cratings, so now we're 2,500 pounds, we have to come off a balcony. We have to cut the railing off the balcony, and we have to come out of these French doors. Half an inch either side, maximum. On the 4th floor. In the middle of a city. Not for the faint of heart, but fun. And then here you can see, one of my favorite things is, nobody's looking up. That was here, everyone will be looking at it. That's pretty cool. Every day. Everyday occurrence. Anyways, into the conveyance, into Los Angeles. This now is what I'm preparing for its return back to Naples. This is the slat crate that I built in Los Angeles. This is one of the things that I'm trialing, and I would like to try to move forward in other ways. This is all done in what they call 80-20 aluminum. It's an extruded aluminum. It basically allows you, these are all different shapes, so you can easily mechanically tie them together, and significantly they allow you to slide things on them because they're channeled. So what I can do with something like that is build my slat crate around him. I just have to define a volume, and now with these, I can slide this forward or backward and this up or down, right? Same thing down here, up or down, forward or backward. So I can do all of my bracing in a way that's adjustable. And the only actual specific work I have to do in crating is this part, right here. Rather than having to create a crate from scratch, which is what we do time and time again, which is incredibly wasteful. It's a 1 to 2 time use, and then all of that wood, all of that foam. With this is your initial investment. It's volume. I can use it in the horizontal. I can use it in the vertical. I can change the configuration. The only part I have to change is the actual bolster. That cuts down our carbon footprint. That makes things repeatable. It also makes them predictable. As long as it fits within that volume, I can use it. Okay? That's the idea. This is then what his slat crate was like for traveling back. He's got his nice seat belts. But remember these for picking him up. Now I can use them to secure him to the bottom of the crate. He's tied straight in. So I've got a triple use out of those 4 anchors. And then sorbothane, all the way around. Load him onto the plane. Deja vu. Now they're redoing all the facades, so now I've got to go through scaffolding, not just through the French doors. In through the French doors, into the galleries, on display. Now he's home. Now you guys are free. Thank you for sticking around. Should I even ask for questions, or do we? Okay, no questions. All right. Thank you all for attending. So those are 14-hour days for 10 months with very little time. Say again, sorry? Yes. Yeah, it certainly had a base, more than likely a stone base. Couldn't tell you if it was bronze or not. Probably stone. Being that it was sitting in water, it probably was stone or masonry. It could have been, you know, the Romans oftentimes were very good at putting basically, so it could have been done in brick and mortar. But it, more than likely, given the irregularity of its stance, it was like a rock.
And the lion skin is lying on is also original.
The little portion of the face and the portion of the ultra, so the lion skin, are enough to say he was on the lion skin and he was on the lion skin. We actually don't have a physical point of connection of the lion skin to him. View of the ultra, so you know that it touched him. So you know that that for sure is part of it. The lion skin should be part of it. It's recorded as coming up with him, but actually as to where it was situated, again, you saw that, it's very dramatic. It's very baroque.
So they had the lion skin and they lost it?
It may not have necessarily preserved, because a lot of things could happen. Certainly they did not find the body on top of the rock. That body was displaced from its actual body. So it probably still exists. And some of that lion skin probably still on the rock. So it's not like they lost it or they just have time. When you really think about it. So some of those things which were probably easier to detach, they did detach. Those things which are still on the rock, when the rock, they stay. So they're still developed. They're still to be found.
Thank you so much, Erik.
Yeah, of course. Thank you guys for coming. Wow, that was a long talk. Sorry.